Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome you. Hello and good morning to today's G Plus webinar. My name is B. Hildenbrand, and I'm the head of the Americas in the G Plus Secretariat. After now 2 years of virtual events, this year's G Plus Annual Stakeholder Forum will be actually back as an in-person event. And in 2 weeks' time, we will meet in Madrid, Spain, and all the stakeholders around the globe are welcome to participate and to meet us in Spain. Being aware that traveling from different parts in the world is not always easy and feasible for everybody, we wanted to keep the regional webinars. And today we are excited to hear about the health and safety challenges and opportunities for offshore wind in the Americas. So first, before we begin, a couple of housekeeping rules. As always, we would like to keep this as engaging as possible. And even if it's virtual, I would really like to encourage you to ask questions. So please put your questions in the chat. We will monitor the chat throughout the webinar. And so your questions can be addressed in the dedicated question and answer time slots. If you run out of time with your questions, don't be worried. We will go back to you after the event and answer your questions afterwards. I would like to recognize or notify you that this webinar is recorded, so we can share this after the event together with the slides that are presented. Without any further ado, I would like to hand over to the chair of the US Focal Group, Scott Hewitt-Gutchin. Scott is moderating today's webinar, and he kicks off the show with a G Plus overview and update you on activities. So Scott is the Senior Director of Offshore Wind Project Services in Avangrid Renewables and has been elected for the chair role in the US and took over from Dave Lavelle end of last year. Scott has 25 years of offshore management experience in the offshore energy industry, both the renewable side and before that in oil and gas. Based in Boston, he has the lead within Avangrid on the engineering, construction, quality, environment, and health and safety across a portfolio of US-based projects. So Scott, warm welcome to you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Beate. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. So welcome to the G Plus Americas webinar. I'd like to start with thanking Beate for those who know her work. She's been pivotal in creating and involving the US Focal Group. She coordinates, instigates, influences, and often expedites us to make sure we do what we're supposed to do. So if you need to know anything more about what we do over here, please get in contact with Beate, okay? I'd also like to take a moment to recognize International Women's Day. I'd like to take a moment to reflect on a kind of gender equal world where we're free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, and a world in which diverse and equitable and inclusive nature. So if we can just make sure that we kind of keep heading in that direction, then I think that everything will be a better place. If you could move to the next slide, B, please. So G Plus at a glance. G Plus's core, its vision, is for a safer and healthier global offshore wind industry. Its only agenda is a safer and healthier global offshore wind industry. It's independent, it's not for profit. It formed in 2012. It has over a decade of contributing to the offshore wind industry. And at its core, it's directed by its members. Okay, if you could move on, please. So as I mentioned, G Plus is member-led. It has 10 full members, with Choreo Generation, who you'll hear from later, being the latest edition in 2022. It has numerous associate members, and these members and associate members work together to support our work programs. They contribute to our work streams. They provide data and they provide inputs. And as you can see from this slide here, we have many key developers, many key supply chain companies who are committed to driving this industry forward with safety at the core of what they do. Move on, please. So very briefly, this is the G Plus is governed by a board of directors, which comes from our members, our member organisations, and these member organisations have provided key industry professionals to be part of the board. But as the industry has grown, and G Plus has also grown and has adapted, and as such has created these focal groups. As you can see, we've got them in Europe, in APAC, and this webinar is really focused on the work we are doing here in the Americas in the G Plus US focal group. Move to the next one. So I want to just take a moment to talk about the 4 key pillars involved with G Plus. The first is the data. So G Plus receives, organizes, and analyzes and presents data. This helps us to understand the offshore wind risk profile and focus our efforts in the right areas, and also provides an accurate assessment of health and safety performance across the industry. We use that data to then focus on good practice guidelines. So we use the data and also the feedback from our members and associate members, and we create these good practice guidelines, which are basically recommendations for procedures, controls, ways of working, which will improve the health and safety within the offshore wind industry. Additionally, if there are subjects, scopes, areas that require specific workshops or technical support, G Plus coordinates these Safe by Design workshops and programs. And then finally, we have Toolbox, where G Plus provides access to Toolbox, which is actually managed by the Energy Institute. And you'll be hearing a little bit more about that soon, so I won't go into too much detail. Okay, if you can move on. So now I just want to focus a little bit on what we're doing here in the US. As you can see, we have a number of the key developers and supply chain members who are active here in the US, and they're part of the G Plus and help influence it. We also focus our efforts on the same key pillars I've just described in terms of data, good practice guidelines, Safe by Design workshops, and also the toolbox and learning from the incidents. We focus on work streams and work groups that are specific to issues and that we have here in the US, where we have differences in standards. But obviously, we also learn from the global business, from the global organization as well. Some examples of some workshops are, some examples of some of the work streams are workshops on safe systems of work, recommended physical capacity assessments for the offshore wind technicians, and we've also recently been coordinating stakeholder inputs into an integrated offshore emergency response plan. So some real specific and defined scope that'll help the offshore wind industry here in the US. The other area is the sharing of experience and knowledge, and I can't really emphasize enough, I'll be very privileged to be part of a team of highly experienced individuals who are really happy to share their knowledge and experience from their organizations, from their backgrounds, to make the industry a better place. We use our sessions when we meet regularly to share knowledge, experience, risks, incidents, and better ways of working. So it's a real benefit. And finally, a key area that we look at is our stakeholders, and which are numerous. So I've only included a few here on this slide, but we have the Bureau of Safety Environmental Enforcement, or BSEE, the US Coast Guard. We have BOEM. We have Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, ACP and BNOW, API, IMCA, GWO, just to name a few. And these are key stakeholders of who we work with in the industry here over in the US. Okay, now I'd like to hopefully I've provided you a brief overview of G Plus. I know it was quick, but also what what we're doing here in the US. But I'd like to now move on to a safety moment. As I mentioned earlier, the Energy Institute coordinates and manages these, but they're available to everyone through the G Plus website. And it's a tool that provides access to safety moments for businesses to use in their everyday discussions and meetings. So with that, I will hand over and show you one. Thank you very much. So for me, the idea of these safety moments is to obviously let people stop and think about the specific topic of that. You know, in that case was vessel collision and the roles of the individuals. But it's also an opportunity to stimulate conversation about safety generally, and people have differing opinions, which is fine as long as it's being talked about. And that conversation will help, you know, safety become a part of everyday conversations and meetings and be part of everyday business, which is where it should be. Okay, good. So next I'd like to introduce the next sessions. First, we're going to hear about the journey of offshore wind and the G Plus in the United States, and then we're going to hear a perspective on HSNE challenges in the emerging markets with a focus on Brazil. So Dave and Ricardo, can you please turn on your cameras? Hello. Excellent. So if I can just introduce you. Dave LaBelle was the inaugural chair of the US focal group, leading from inception for nearly 2 years. So absolutely the right person to talk about this. Dave has held a number of leadership roles, most recently in Avangrid, and these included the Chief Administration Officer and Vice President of Environmental Health, Safety and Technical Training. Previous to that, Dave held leadership and management positions supporting manufacturing, utility, renewables, and businesses. Ricardo will be speaking second. Ricardo de Luca is the country manager for Corio Generation, who I mentioned earlier, who is joined as a full member in 2022. Ricardo has 20 years of professional experience with an extensive background in the offshore oil and gas industry and the port sector. In 2022, Ricardo joined Corio Generation as country director for Brazil. And interestingly, Ricardo and his family lived in Europe for 4 years, working as an expat in the offshore drilling company. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Dave.
Thanks so much, Scott, and thank you for inviting me today to talk about the journey of offshore wind and G+ in the U.S. Let me just say that I'm grateful to have been part of standing up the organization in the U.S. and I was really supported by a number of excellent professionals from the Energy Institute, G+, and the member organizations, just as you mentioned, Scott. It's always important to reflect on where you've come from and celebrate your successes. And what I really want to do today is to share with you some of the tremendous progress the U.S. G+ Focal Group has made since forming in late 2020. We started with only 6 inaugural members, 4 full and 2 associate members. And, as much as we'd like to, we certainly can't ignore the fact that we were in the throes of a global pandemic at the time that we actually started this team and this organization, and the impact that had on our ability to network and engage stakeholders. We all had to establish new ways of working, since in-person meetings, the safety by design workshops that we typically do, and conferences were no longer taking place. So initially, we focused on identifying, who our key stakeholders were, and Scott mentioned a few of those. And certainly, first and foremost, we focused on work with BSEE, with IMCA, with ACP, and Coast Guard, just to name a few. And we worked as a team really to find common ground to prioritize our activities. I think it's also worth noting that BSEE, who is a key stakeholder, had really already reached out to G+ in Europe to benchmark and understand the progression of safety in offshore wind. So we knew that Sherry and her team were already actively engaged in trying to find a safe way to work in the US. So we started with and continue to leverage work that's already done by our European counterparts who are many years ahead of us in offshore wind. At that point, offshore wind progress in the US continued to be a bit slower than anticipated. And after a failed attempt with Cape Wind, developers finally made headway in permitting the first commercial scale project in the US with Vineyard Wind, which in some ways kicked off the industry. Today, we still only have 42 megawatts installed capacity between Block Island and Seabow in Virginia. In 2021, the political landscape changed, removing some of the earlier roadblocks for the industry, and the pace of projects increased dramatically. So much so that regulators actually slowed the permitting process of offshore wind to conduct a more robust analysis of the cumulative impacts. And many of you will remember that. An important outcome of that analysis was the development of a proposed leasing schedule. And this was really pivotal because it allowed developers to really better plan and better prepare for those opportunities as they came. During that time, industry groups, regulators, and companies alike were all regrouping to really determine how best to prepare for the rapid growth that we saw. And many of you will remember that AWEA, maybe the most prominent wind energy association in the US, at that time merged with American Clean Power and went through their own progression and change at that point in time. So that gets us through 2021. When we get to 2022, a much busier year. The G+ Focal Group was actually finally able to come together at an in-person meeting at the IPF conference in Atlantic City. And that was more than 16 months after the group was formed. The Biden administration also signed the Inflation Reduction Act, known as the IRA, into law with some $369 billion in climate investments, providing a needed boost for the industry. There was a much increased interest in investments, which led to record bids at lease auctions like the New York Bight. Unfortunately, also in 2022, we had the beginning of the Ukraine war, which had very dramatic impacts on the global energy landscape, really highlighting the need for energy independence and diversification. It also had an impact on the supply chain for many projects as well. As we look forward, I'd say the future looks bright for the energy sector, and particularly offshore wind. We see an increasing diversity of developers progressing from European-based companies to US companies, including oil and gas and others from the energy sector. The Interior Department finalized the transfer of regulatory authority, including workplace safety and environmental compliance, to BSEE, which was in the works for a long period of time. There was an unprecedented number of projects. There are an unprecedented number of projects in the pipeline at this point in time, as you can see on the graph. We see supply chain improvements with manufacturers who are now looking to move to the US. Floating wind is also progressing and garnering support from regulators and the industry alike. In addition, the G+ is now expanding to a broader focus on the Americas, and we're fortunate to have Ricardo here to talk a little bit about offshore wind in Brazil. So to wrap it up, over the last 2 years, the US G+ Focal Group has accomplished quite a lot, despite what I would say are some significant headwinds. The team convened 25 times, including 2 in-person meetings. They held monthly calls with Sherry Hunter and her team at BSEE. They were invited to join NREL standard meetings, and that's the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They were asked to participate on advisory boards for both ACP and the Offshore Energy Safety Institute. We presented at a number of meetings and conferences, leveraging the collective expertise of our membership. And then probably part of the most important work is revision of the G+ integrated offshore emergency response guidance and safe management of small vessel guidance in order to make it a little bit more US centric. They also initiated an important project on arc flash labeling and electrical safety framework. And they're continuing to work on a number of global industry good practice guidelines. And I'm sure we will continue to see good things come from this committed group of professionals. So there's a brief history of where we've come from and some of the successes we've seen. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ricardo De Luca, Country Director for Corio Generation. Ricardo?
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Scott, for the invitation. Very happy to speak here. Can we jump to the third slide, please? I think just a brief introduction about Corio, for who doesn't know the company. The company is a spin-off from the Green Investment Group from Macquarie Asset Management, one of the biggest investment infrastructure funds in the world. And we last year we create Corio, so this is the one. That was born with more than almost 20 gigawatts of projects around the world. So we are all over now, and increasing our projects. And for a young company, we have a lot of challenges, and one of them is the health and safety. Next one, please. In Brazil, we as per the introduction, I joined last year. We registered last year 5 projects in Brazil in the environmental agents. We have almost 70 projects, totalizing almost 176 gigawatts of projects to be developed in Brazil. We still have to finalize this year the regulation to start working and developing the projects. For next one, please. So here we are. I was chatting with a friend of mine that is attending the conference here, the webinar, and that we worked together in the offshore drilling for 10 years in Brazil. We brought the first vessels to work here offshore for the oil companies at that time, and we saw how strong and how difficult it was to create a culture, a health and safety culture. And I was reminding here that we never stopped. So you can never stop. You need to keep learning and improving all the time. So I remember that the industry, the oil and gas industry in Brazil, used to allow, in brackets, incidents, even fatalities, okay, in the 40, 50 years ago. And now we see a very strong safety culture, a safety that is part of the performance of the company. So you are not allowed to make any mistakes anymore. So, and then I compare this with the challenge that offshore drilling, the wind offshore will face in the world, and of course in Brazil, that is a new industry that is trying to be created and be mature. So offshore campaigns are always challenged and brings, I think, a lot of risks. So all the operations, all the vessels going in and out, all the installations, working from high, fire explosions. So all that is involved in an offshore operation, you need to be in the top of their health and safety culture and training, and keep the best people always involved in those operations. We in the industry in Brazil will face the offshore wind industry will face is a new industry, so they will face all the challenges that a new industry faces when they are into a country. We don't have the rules yet for the health and safety, so we see that the oil and gas industry in Brazil, that is a strong industry, will help a lot to teach and to bring the expertise to adapt to offshore wind. So we have a strong operation for offshore oil and gas in Brazil. So all the vessels, all the ports, all the offshore bases, all the team involved, so all the skills that was developed during the 100 years that we are doing this in Brazil, this will be for sure used to maximize the offshore wind start in Brazil. We need to all the time we have a strong onshore wind industry in Brazil that follows the civil construction rules for health and safety. And I think the merge with the offshore oil and gas with the onshore wind will benefit to have and I speed up the learning process to have a very nice health and safety culture for offshore wind in Brazil. Oh, next one, please. And the risks, no. So as I explained, we start with the surveys of the sites that we are looking at now. So we are going to deploy leader buoyancy. We are going to have vessels doing offshore monitoring. We have geophysical works. We are going to have all the lifting work. So that it's super. We have now towers from almost 300 meters. So how do you install that? How do you train your guys to be accurate to do this job? So all the electrical parts, and also it's cables all over, or in the logistics. So it's a number of services and that we will need to work together and develop the team, create the new industry, and train. It's like what we face in the oil and gas industry. It's a parallel here. We need to train. We cannot make any mistake. You need to pay attention. You need to have a inspection of the equipment all the time. So it's a redundancy for safety, health and safety. And I see that we will manage it pretty well in Brazil, but of course it's a learning curve. So you take time to develop the skills, to bring people, good people to the industry, and of course develop all the training centers. To work offshore. This industry will be all over Brazil. The oil and gas industry is focused in just one region. So the offshore wind will be in the south, in the northeast, in the southeast. So it's a challenge as well for the expansion of all those skills that will need to be developed during the following years. So I think that's my presentation here, and I hope that I could have shared something nice and interesting for you guys. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ricardo. Okay, so I've just got a couple of questions, Dave. Yeah, thanks very much. You can come back on. Just listening to you talking there. I guess I'll direct the first one at you, Ricardo. You sort of talked about the health and safety standards. So how do you see the health and safety standards in general in Brazil, and how do you think the offshore wind industry will benefit from that?
Thank you, Scott. I think that's what I tried to explain here. We will need to use the high standards that we have in the oil and gas industry. So when you work for companies like Equinor, Shell, Total, Petrobras, offshore, you face the high standards that you can see. They will keep you pressure to not make any mistake, to train your people, to develop the best services, to inspect all the equipments. So I think that's what we need to follow. So we need to bring those experience, those training papers, bring the resources as well. So we need to. I think that's the beauty of the energy transition. So the offshore wind is everyone want to work now in the energy transition side. So we will see a lot of people transiting from oil and gas to offshore wind in Brazil. So I think that's the where we will capture all the skills and to keep a good increase in the health and safety performance.
Excellent, thank you. I was going to ask about that. Is where do you see the skills coming from with the right mentality and the right background? And you see it mainly coming from oil and gas, is what you're saying, yeah?
But the oil and gas is a sector very focused in one region, the southeast of Brazil. So we have a challenge to expand this to the rest of Brazil, because offshore wind will be all over. So even for training centers, all these you need to expand the culture. So it will be a challenge, but we have something that we can kick off from the beginning. So we can bring this focal point for the oil and gas and try to expand to other regions and bring those high standards to offshore wind. Thank you.
Dave, one for you. So you talked about the journey that we've had here in the US. So what do you think that G+ does and can do more of to support the ongoing journey of offshore wind and making sure that health and safety is at the heart of what we do?
Right. Thank you, Scott. I guess I'd say first, I believe the approach G+ takes to support and collaborate with all stakeholders is unique. You mentioned it before, right? It's an independent organization. It's purposely that way and impartial. Really focused on that mission of keeping employees, contractors, and the public safe. So the G+ needs to keep doing that and continuing to be a facilitator when necessary. But two ways I think the G+ can really do more going forward is, one, I think, is to ensure that those various industry groups are working in concert with each other, prioritizing what's important to the industry and the regulators, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and really helping to clearly delineate who's doing what and how it will connect. So that's the first piece. And then the second is, and I think this will really help with the first, is to really ensure senior business leaders in the U.S. are actively involved, understand the effort that's going on and are actively supporting. And by supporting, I mean advocating for alignment with other industry groups and ensuring the company resources are dedicated to doing the work, not just HSE professionals, but project personnel and other experts who are building and designing systems. I think Europe tends to do this far better than we do in the US. And I think it's really incumbent upon us to make sure we're dedicating those resources to get involved and be actively involved in helping develop the standards that will keep us safer in the end.
I agree. Perfect. Yeah, thank you. It's we need to be thinking at an early stage. It's not just health and safety's responsibility. It's everybody to think about the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. So yeah, no, I fully agree. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, so let me try and direct these. And I say if we can't answer them now, then we'll cover them later. This one's for you, Dave. It says you mentioned working on a new small vessel guidance to make it more practical for the US. Can you elaborate on this?
Actually, I think I would flip that over to the existing chair to see where that is. I can certainly tell where we made progress to before we hand it over. From my perspective, you know, a lot of the guidance that was put together by Europe was phenomenal. But when read by some of the U.S. resources, didn't actually align with some of the terminology and some of the organizational structure that we have in the U.S. So really, it was to just make sure that it aligned with the way we talk about small vessels and how we support small vessels, and certainly recognizing that it's a huge challenge for us in the U.S. with the fleet that we have. So that's what I meant by that, and certainly, you know, we're doing the same with other guidelines and standards just to make sure that they're fit for purpose for the U.S. and what we have here in the U.S.
Fantastic, thank you. And I've just seen that Beate has actually provided a response to that as well in the comments, so that's great. Thank you. Ricardo, question for you. In all of the challenges, what would be the most critical for the development of offshore wind in Brazil?
Scott, for me, one of the main challenges is the infrastructure. So the proper infrastructure for offshore wind, it's a huge equipment. It's a combination of onshore and offshore infrastructure capabilities. We have a lack of vessels to install in the world. We are still learning how to install in the best practice to install. So for me, I think the proper infrastructure and how to make it safer, it's a big challenge for the industry.
Thank you very much. I'd agree with that. I mean, that's not just a Brazil issue, because the technology is changing and increasing all the time. Having the right tools to do the job is also a challenge. Okay, let me keep going here. We have another question here for you, Ricardo. Where do you foresee challenges or opportunities in developing an offshore wind workforce?
I think I think there is also, of course, the capabilities that we already have in place. So in Brazil, have the onshore wind industry that is growing. So there's a lot of people working in this industry, and of course the oil and gas industry. That's a combination that we should do and put all those experiences together and start to scale up those resources. Training is a super important part of that. So we need also to create this culture of training and expansion. So I think it's and of course using the benefit of that people want to go for the renewables. They want to work for that. They see a future on that, a long future. So I think there is a lot of combination to bring young people as well to this industry.
Fantastic. And this was for Ricardo, but I think, you know, it'd be interesting your insights as well on this, David, about technology and software helping with the push. Maybe if you answer that first, Ricardo, you know, how, and then maybe Dave, think about that for the US.
Yeah, we already, I think when my time that I was in the oil and gas, we were using then a lot of the technology to reduce the risk factor Okay, so offshore. So I think less people working is better. So less hands all over the place is better. So I think we should improve on that and reduce the human interaction with the equipments, and I think that's a good challenge.
Excellent. Dave, do you have any insights on that?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same, right? Certainly anytime we can mitigate risk through taking out that human-machine interface and get people out of the environment, it's a win, right? So that's an elimination or mitigation. So I would agree. I think, technology's come so far. We need to challenge ourselves to make sure that we continue to use that as opposed to putting people out in dangerous situations. So I think great. I think I will say the wind industry already does this quite well. Certainly onshore, they already do it well, and I think leveraging those learnings and translating them and bringing them forward is certainly critical. So I agree completely with Ricardo on that.
Excellent. Yeah, some concepts, and that's jumped to my mind, like drones, using drones for inspection rather than rope access, having onshore training facilities and virtual training facilities, etc. So you get to see it in a safe environment. I think that's good. Okay, we've got a final question here. I think this might be one for more for Beate, which is as items are being developed or revised for applicability in the US, is there a focal group working to ensure the guidelines as written are not contradicting US regulations? Well, I think the guidelines are written to identify where there are gaps, where there are contradictions, and clarify them for operating in the US. That's been my experience to date. Dave, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think certainly where there are existing regulations, there's a keen view of making sure there's alignment. That's been a big piece of the challenge and the opportunity that we have, right, is ensuring that we do have the appropriate set of regulations and or standards that apply to offshore wind. And so I'd say the group is hyper-focused on this. I think there's a little concern about contradiction and more concern about right sizing and having the appropriate set of standards and regulations and working in partnership with the regulators to make sure that we've identified those and have managed them in a way that makes sense for the business to operate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentations and your insights and answering the questions. It's much appreciated. And also just special thanks to Dave for leaving G Plus in such a good condition for me. I appreciate that. Okay, so we're now going to move on to our second part of this session. And I'd like to introduce Rachel Porto. If you'd like to turn on your camera, Rachel. Hi. So Rachel is Courier Generation's Global Head of Workplace Health, Safety, Environmental and Social Matters, and also a G Plus board member. Rachel has 23 years experience working in the energy sector, primarily in QHSES, and 15 years experience in the wind industry. Having worked across Latin America, Europe and Asia in different stages of a wind farm cycle, from components manufacturing through to development, installation and O&M of the wind farm. So a huge amount of experience. So with that, I'm very happy to hand over the reins to Rachel, who will be hosting the panel session.
Thank you, Scott. Good day to you all and happy Women's Day. I'm very excited to hear from the panelists that we have a great team today. Can you move to the next slide, please? Yeah, we have a great team today. We have Peter Lukens. If you could turn on your video. Okay,
hello,
we
everyone.
have Peter. Yeah, we have Peter Lukens, Head of Service EQS North America for Siemens Gamesa. Then we have Rob Howe. Please, could you turn on your camera? Safety Leader for Equinor. And then we have Neil Sunderberg, Safety Compliance Program Manager. Can you put from Dominion Energy? And then we have Elena Carra, HSS EUQ Director, Ocean Winds. And we have the last one, that's Jeff, HSE Manager for Vineyard Wind. Can you put your camera? Welcome to this panel. We have prepared some questions to the panelists. However, if you have any questions, just write and post it on the chat, that we are going to take it on the Q&A session later on. Okay, I would like to start with the first question. And this first question is also an opportunity for all of you, for the panelists, to talk a little bit about your background and bring your experience to the audience. So the first question is, what experience can we bring from projects in the Americas? Let's start with Peter.
Sure. Yeah. So Peter Lukens, I've been with Siemens Gamesa for 16 years in various capacities, from manufacturing to quality to training to obviously health and safety. And I think one of the things that we can learn is just, obviously understand that even though it's a different environment with offshore from onshore projects, there's still a lot of the same things that can happen, and a lot of best practices and lessons learned that we can take from, unfortunate incidents that we've had in the past. And so really transferring that knowledge base that we've had from our experiences working on onshore projects in America is very transferable to the offshore environment. Certainly there's going to be some differences in how we approach things working in an offshore situation, but I think a lot of the experience that we have, especially when we get into the turbine, are very transferable. So I think that's a good place to start from my perspective.
Good, thank you. Now let's hear from Rob.
Sure, thanks, Rachel. We're fortunate in the U.S. to have, Peter mentioned the existing onshore wind farms that bring a wealth of experience from our labor force. There are a lot of learnings have been gained when it comes to delivering on health and safety. The U.S. though also does have a very mature offshore industry, energy industry, and I look at the historical oil and gas operations and one of the things that I enjoy about being in safety is how transferable safety is across industries and projects and operations. And so we do have a wealth that we can lean on when it comes to offshore project development in the U.S., both the learnings that we've extracted from incidents or proactive safety strategies that deliver for our workers offshore today, we can write for, but also lean on those relationships that have been built with our regulatory agencies as well to make sure that we're coming in this new industry, partnering and maximizing those relationships that we've nurtured over decades in the U.S. So it's an exciting time for offshore wind as it emerges in the U.S. and everybody from the private to the public sectors are very much looking forward to delivering this for the U.S. and reaping all the benefits that will come for everybody involved with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Now let's hear Jeff, your perspective on the topic.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, I'm Jeff Neal. I am the HSE manager for Vineyard Wind. I've been here about, coming up on 4 years now. It seems kind of crazy it's been that long. Previously, I was with an OEM overseeing the construction and the manufacturing side for renewable energy. As far as some experiences, I think, Rob and Peter kind of mentioned some really good things. I think there's a lot of experience in the onshore wind arena and also from the offshore oil and gas. And one of the good things about safety is there's no real competitive advantage. And I think organizations like G+ or ACP or any, I'd say industry, focus groups, just a sharing of information, successes, but also really just sharing failures where we've, failed in the past, where we've had incidents where we can really learn from, and actually sharing those with sometimes our competitors, right? Because I think at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, whether it's, a developer, an OEM, a regulatory agency. Our main goal with topics and safety is to prevent injuries to our personnel, our frontline workers, which is really what we all want at the end of the day. So I think sharing our own internal experiences across the industry is really what's going to make a big difference here. I know I'm taking lessons learned quite a bit, being the first, commercial size offshore wind farm. We're going to have a lot of good learnings I hope to share with G+, ACP, regulatory agencies going forward. It's been a wild ride so far, but I think just making sure we share our successes and failures is going to be the key. Is going to be the key for success going forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Jeff. Now let's hear from Janel, please.
Yeah, hi, Eniel Sandberg. I'm with Dominion Energy, safety for offshore wind with them. Been with them for 2 years now. Previously, I've worked with safety oversight for over 1,500 offshore wind turbines, the construction of, and safeguarded the lives of all of the people who built those. And I want to keep that up. Coming to the US, I worked on the CVOW project. So we built the 2 turbines off of Virginia, and I'll just give a story which for me underlines, what the background is and what we're coming into here in the US. The first transfer that was made was basically a transfer with somebody stepping across with an abandonment life jacket on. They didn't have any other PPE on. And we said, whoa, what just happened here? This is, completely outside of any offshore wind standards, anything that we're training in GWO. So we started asking the questions to the crew and to the person. And the crew said, well, we always transfer people like that as pilots and in the Navy, they just go up the ladders. So, everyone coming over from Europe said, that's an interesting perspective. And, we have to start looking at, okay, what are the expectations here versus what our expectations are. The person climbing said, oh, well, I thought that we only needed to do that when climbing wind turbines. This person had transferred to a ladder on a vessel, on a cable vessel. That to going to Block Island, where we experienced a harbor a contractor typically working in harbors who brought harbor type equipment out and then tried to go offshore and ended up having to replace their whole vessel spread with offshore sized equipment, right? And change their methods to be offshore. What I would, like to kind of tell everyone is when you're looking at the contractors, it's really important to engage the maritime industry. It's really important to understand what the level of experience are with contractors. And if they are, harbor based, there's a certain level of competence that needs to be added somehow to reach the right flying height for what we're doing. Because as they said, actually, we underestimated the air to surface interface, right? And the surface changes a lot when you're offshore. It's not the same when you're onshore or when you're in harbors.
Good, thank you. Now I would love to hear from Elena.
Thank you, Rachel. Well, my name is Elena Caja, and I'm the HSEQ director at Ocean Winds. I've been with the company for the last 2 years. It's a pretty new company, but I've been involved in the health and safety area for over 15 years and in the offshore wind industry for the last four years. I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, I agree on everything that my colleagues have said so far. I want to point out also that most of us work for companies that started developing offshore projects in Europe long time ago, many years ago. So I think that we can all bring the experience from the European projects to the US and other American markets like Brazil. And one of the things that I think that we can bring experience from is for example, the floating technology. Okay, so offshore wind industry is a new business, but especially floating technology is newer than bottom fixed. So in Europe, Ocean Winds has developed or has one floating project under operation already. So for the last 10 years, we've been developing or working with that technology. And in some areas of the United States, the sea conditions will oblige us to build floating wind farms. So that is one thing that we can bring experience from Europe or other regions to the Americas.
Thank you, Elena. Let's go to the second question. And how is G+ cooperating with regional organizations to getting global industry best practice implemented in the US regulatory framework and supply chain? Let's ask Ian.
Yeah, so I've been part of the G+ focal group for North America, but also part of ACP together with Jeff. And part of ACP is actually working on, industry best practices to propose them as standards and then get the consensus. So what we've been doing is taking a lot of our experience from Europe and all of these special things that we see, even equipment that isn't something that you'd expect to see here. There's European rated equipment, all of like, for instance, the Kongfrog quick connector or the life jackets that are 275 newtons that have a person locator beacon. You look at that and you say, yeah, this is what we use, and everyone here says, wow, that's not something that we've ever even seen before. But all of these types of standards and these safe working practices that are coming from Europe, we're bringing into documents that then can become standards. And we've really focused a lot on bringing G+ perspectives and G+ good practice guidelines into all of that.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And Peter, do you have what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think Neil brought up a couple of really great points there. The collaboration with ACP has been really pivotal. I've been involved with them as well on more the onshore side in years past, but certainly involved with some ANSI standards development and consensus standards, which I think is really an important way to go. I think, to add on that, some of the work that we've been doing recently with G+ and like the Offshore Safety Network and just the opportunities to, collaborate with others in the industry as I think offshore is such in such an infancy stage in North America. It's really an opportunity for us to learn as a group and get better together. I think the more that we can collaborate and find creative opportunities to get better as an industry very early on is going to help us in the long run, rather than working in silos and trying to figure things out as the OEM or as the owner or as the provider of materials. If we can all kind of come together and collectively figure out what's going to be best for us all in the long term, it'll certainly help to reduce those bumps and bruises as we move forward. Yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Rob.
Yeah, just wanted to chime in a little bit as well, build off of the information that's been shared. My own perspective, speaking specifically to G+, that I've really enjoyed being a part of, is a unifying voice out there that G+ is serving to connect all of us as members across these various external groups that are looking to support the offshore wind industry. I think it's fair to categorize as a bit of a gold rush out there right now, with numerous entities out there looking to support and be involved. Many people I know that I see names, very familiar names, dialed in right now, I know sit on various focal groups and subcommittees, HSE subcommittees, and different entities that are trying to support best practice development, recommended practices, things of that nature. B, and the work that she's done helping the G+ here in the US identify those activities, bring us together. It's a very admirable work that's being done. Makes me enjoy being part of G Plus as a collective to make sure we are out there engaging with one another. So definitely want to take a moment and give the nod to this organization that we're here speaking about today.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for your comment. Let's move to a third question. And what do you see as main difference for health and safety in the Brazilian market comparing to Europe and to the US, Helena?
Yes, well, I think that Ricardo has done an excellent presentation for us to understand a little bit more about the Brazilian market. And but I see differences, but what I see is many similarities between Brazil and the US when it comes to offshore wind industry, okay? So for example, I know that the water depths of Brazil are the same conditions as in the east coast of the US. So the technology used will be mainly bottom fixed. That is a big similarity. I also know that when talking about electricity demand, again, the Brazilian market will be similar to the east coast of the United States because the big consumption are very close to the coast. And so no big lines, power lines, high voltage power lines will be needed. And big cities are in that area. I also think that, as Ricardo mentioned, of course, they both do have a strong safety culture, but I see that in Europe, the safety culture is even more stronger because it's like in the offshore wind industry is being developed for many years now. So I think that in the US and in Brazil, they are still building that safety culture. Okay, Ocean Winds has a license is in the license process since 2020 for 5 gigawatts in Brazil in 4 different states. And you know that Ocean Winds is a joint venture 50-50 from EDPR and ENGIE. So both sponsors have a lot of presence in Brazil. So EDPR has, I think, of almost 800 megawatts of solar and onshore wind farms installed or capacity installed. And ENGIE is now the second biggest private company in this sector in Brazil. So we have a lot of relationship with our sponsors. So I am learning from them what are the differences and the similarities when talking about safety. And I think that we can say that, well, risk, as Ricardo has mentioned, the risk in this industry are very, very high. Contractor management is something that I see very similar from the US, but a little different from the European offshore wind industry. I see that difference. And yeah, well, and all the things that I've mentioned before. I see also an opportunity for us to improve our safety standards in both countries, because I see that the market, when talking about safety, I don't see that there are many regulations, standards to comply with. So any experience that we can bring from other regions like European will be welcome in both markets, in Brazil and the US.
Good, thank you, Elena. And Peter, Siemens Gamesa is also in Brazil. And do you want to complement?
Yeah, I guess I don't really have too much to add other than, it's certainly an area that we're exploring. I don't know that we have any active contracts at the moment, but certainly a growth area for our business, and something that we're looking into. I think, obviously, as with any global organization, we try to take the opportunities to share best practices and lessons learned within our company. So we have regional meetings with our health and safety heads for each of the different business units that we have, and we're very cross-functional in that way. So we try to take every opportunity that we can to share experiences, and I'm sure that will be the same. We're ramping up here in North America, and I'm sure as they do and we're getting a lot of support from Europe, as Elena mentioned, right? We're having a lot of experts come here and help train us. And I think maybe we'll be able to do the same thing as we gain experience in North America to be able to help our Brazilian colleagues as they get ramped up for operations down there. So I think it's all about being, again, connected, collaboration, and making all those good information transfers available for us to continue to continuous improvement as an industry.
Thank you, Peter. Let's move to another question. And this one goes to Jeff. And what of the experience gained in the US can be taken in other emerging offshore wind markets in the Americas?
Wow, there's probably going to be a lot. I would say, one of the first things that would come to my mind is your overall structure of, let's say, your safety management system. It should be well structured, well formatted, and auditable, right? So you can do an internal audit, but when you're going into emerging market, especially even here in the U.S., it's going to be a lot of interest in this industry. I know we probably have some of our colleagues from BSEE on the line too. With these federal regulators, they have a responsibility to ensure that you are providing a safe work environment and you're doing things not only to protect the workers, also protect the environment. So having a safety management system that's organized and set up to where you have that information readily available at your fingertips for, any request from any regulatory bodies or anything like that is going to be imperative. And it's also beneficial to all, not only your company, but also to your contractors to have, it's pretty well established. It's easy to follow, it's simplified, and it's effective. That's going to be the key. It's measurable. If it's not, there's no real value to it. I think some of the other challenges I'd say we've seen so far, and I think Anil kind of touched upon it a little bit too, is, local content requirements. What you'll see is, in winning a lot of these projects, for whether it's a state or a country or anything like that, a lot of times they are going to have a lot of local content requirements to use smaller local contractors. I think there was a question earlier about small vessels. Well, we have requirements to use fishing vessels, to provide work for local fishermen, to where the technical capabilities are there from the workers and the contractors for these smaller local companies, but they aren't necessarily used to this larger, more mature safety culture and safety organization. So there's a lot of things that we take for granted on a day-to-day basis that, when you first when you go walk up to a crew of 5 people and ask for their JSA or their risk assessment, and they say, oh yeah, we do one every Monday, not every day, you say, whoa, that's something you take for granted. And it's not that they're willfully negligent. No one's ever trained them on that or coached them on that. So that's something, your contractor management, yes, is always important, but also understanding there's going to be some hand-holding that's going to have to be done. Some of the other things I've seen, maybe something you can take over is training. I think that's one of the good things ACP and G Plus does, is if you have a centralized and a common and basic training requirements across the industry, that's beneficial to developers, OEMs, contractors, and that your workforce is transferable. So a technician isn't going to be done on one project or one O&M site, go to another one and have to get a completely different set of trainings. You've got some standardization there, which is beneficial. And really need to take a look at your emergency response capabilities. One of the things we've seen, especially up here in the Northeast lease areas, is they're significantly offshore. It's not, 5 miles offshore, we're 20 miles offshore, to where response times are significantly delayed, whether it's by helicopter or a CTV. So, We have the U.S. Coast Guard here, but if there's weather delays, a helicopter can't fly in any conditions. So we've had to kind of think outside the box in some things like this. And so don't be afraid to do that and ask questions. We're going to have a certified licensed paramedic 24/7 on a CTV in the lease area full time, to where we can provide that tier 2 advanced life support, life-saving care, quicker than waiting on a helicopter to go out there. So at least we can start providing care, try to stabilize the patient, start working our way towards shore. If we have to meet a helo, great. If we to go all the way in, then that's what we'll do. So there's some unique challenges that you're going to come across, that you're going to have to kind of put your heads together and think outside the box, on top of just general differences in legal requirements from, we're seeing it here in the US, from Europe. Some things, theories, a lot of the theories are the same, but the execution of, let's say, group lockout tagout is different than the electrical mechanical safety rules you see in Europe, right? So there are subtle differences there. That
Jeff, can you explain a little bit more in detail this part, the difference you see?
So, I mean, for instance, we see with lockout tagout, control of hazardous energies or confined space, requirements here in the US, let's say regulatory, whether they're defined by OSHA or NFPA 70E for lockout tagout, things like that, where you have big thing over in Europe is, formerly working for an OEM, wind turbine safety rules, right? So the theory is the same for controlling hazardous energies, right? What you're trying to do, prevent, people from being exposed to any energized components, whether it's electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, things like that. But the application of the isolation could be different. How you perform group lotto here in the US, whether you're following NFPA 70E, which what we have to do, it's, one lock for every person. So you can't just have one person say, okay, I'm the lead authorized person or senior authorized person. I've isolated that component, put the lock on, everyone else can come in to that area. No, all the other people have to put their own individual locks on as well. So again, the theory is the same, but the execution there's some subtle differences between the two. And it'll be the same, when you go to Brazil or, other countries or Mexico or anything like that. So you've got to really, to really get a good legal compliance team and is key to make sure they review all those standards. Oh, I see Neil's got his hand up as well. You could probably speak to it as well.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Just to add to it, when I was with Siemens, we actually bridged what we were doing in Europe to NFPA 70E in a big workshop, and it turned out really well. But speaking from the Dominion Energy perspective, we always require Dominion Energy to hang locks, right? To then have contractors doing it is completely outside of our procedure. So we have to change as a company and say, okay, so how are we going to control this? And that goes through the wind turbine safety rules. It's just a very different way of looking at it and thinking about it. You have all these assets spread out over a really large geographical location. So how can you say, okay, you're authorized to go and do that as a contractor, not as somebody who's within Dominion Energy? How do we recognize the training that you have? How do we recognize that you're competent or qualified to be doing that? So just adding to that, it's these small differences within what we're doing. They have bigger implications, and we have to work through them. And it's great to be able to work through them with the rest of the industry at the same time.
Thank you. That's would you like to add to this question, Peter or Rob or Elena? We can move to the next question. Okay. This goes to Rob. How has the G+2 bring the regional perspective into global industry best practice to underpin the G+ health and safety strategy?
Well, I think that question's a good continuance of the conversation that's just happened. A lot of the input that Jeff and Neil were sharing with the group here. I think that question also, as I hear it, asking about, bringing the U.S. perspective into our best practice, recommended practice. And I think there was let me look in the chat, there was a question earlier from Mary that asked that very question, the first top of this segment, about making sure we have that fit for purpose guidance documents out there. And this is actually an issue very near and dear to my heart. I failed to kind of introduce myself at the beginning here. I serve as the Safety, Security, Sustainability Manager for Equinor in the U.S. with the renewable program. Equinor is a Norwegian-based company. We have a very large global presence. We've had operations and projects in the U.S. for a number of years. But in my time working for Equinor, there's been a lot of square pegs and round holes trying to fit some of our governance that we use in Europe into the activities that we'll do in the U.S. And there's a lot of education has to be done internally to make sure we have that proper fit to deliver and meet the expectations at the end of the day. And I see the similarities in this question about how G Plus is taking that on kind of on a broader scale to make sure we're delivering those tools that people can use and they don't become obtuse guidance documents that we have to work around, because all of us in safety know as soon as you start to get workarounds, well, that's that standard deviation level. That's where that you enter those. Well, we got by with it this one time, and then we know how that all compounds and becomes a real problem for safety deliverables out there. So within the G Plus, one thing that I do appreciate is strategically there's discussions around what the focal groups can be developed, what entities within the U.S. focal group can be developed to take on to help develop best practice standards specific to our needs in the U.S., where we identified gaps in for material that's not out there today, so we can start to build up the supporting documents from that U.S. perspective to understand what we're all going to need to make this work in the end. So I think G Plus is doing a very admirable job of doing just that, bringing in the collective of peer members that are operating out there, from the operating developers, the OEMs, making sure we have all the right voices in the room, identify those gaps, and then come in strategically to get participation from everybody on the boards. And then we're each reaching into our own organization for SMEs that can come and participate in workshops that feed into developing the best practice guidance documents that will, again, be more fit for our own use here in the U.S. So it's exciting times, and I think it's good strategies are being implemented today that we're all going to benefit from.
Good, thank you. I can see there is a good question here, and all questions are good questions, no? Let's just start. But can the group give any examples of where we are learning good practice from the U.S. oil and gas industry? We were mentioned that Ricardo and mentioned about the oil and gas, the use of the learnings from the oil and gas industry in Brazil. Is this happening in the U.S.? Yeah, Rob.
I guess
Rob,
I could.
Please.
Oh, go ahead, Rob.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that's a good segue. And I had mentioned my own background here working for Equinor. We are at originality an oil and gas company, and we do have operations in the Gulf of Mexico as well as onshore unconventional operations, and do lean on the practices that we've developed for delivering on safety. But one thing specific to the question about oil and gas in the U.S. and then translate it to offshore wind development. One example I might bring forward is the relationship with BSEE, our primary regulatory agency in the Gulf for the U.S. for all outer continental development. It's the programs that have been developed to serve oil and gas have been run through the ringer, if you will. They've been battle tested with partnering with our regulatory agent to make sure that we have good tools out there to, at the end of the day, the industry, offshore development industry can lean on. And that's a very prime one that we'll translate into offshore wind develop and share, even those that are coming in without that maybe oil and gas background, but can bring their own experience for other offshore projects, specifically renewables. We can partner up and learn from one another, so we have that historical context. I'm very much a big proponent of what the existing industry can do to help lift up the emerging new one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I totally agree with that, Rob, and I think I can add to that a little bit in some of what some of the work we've been doing with oil and gas on safety management systems and the RP7075 specifically. That's something that's been now trying to be worked into something that could be more wind specific. So taking what's been learned in the oil and gas industry and then having that transferred over to wind. I know that there's obviously been some discussions about, how does that fit within our renewable environment, right? So it's not an easy conversation in certain respects too, because I think that there's different mindsets, right? As we go into some of those conversations, but certainly I think the overall sentiment and what we've been sharing here on the call is that safety is everybody's business, right? And there's no barriers that need to be in the way of keeping our employees safe and having successful management systems in place that can benefit us and our operations. So I think that's one other element is we are actively working, through the relationship with Boehm and Bessie to actually have those connections made with the oil and gas industry as a standard best practice.
Thanks, Peter. There's a question to Jeff, Peter, or Yen. Robust safety management system were mentioned. What's the most pertinent objective of your dream safety management system, for example, data, wind optimization?
I think mine would be zero injuries.
Yeah, I think that's, obviously the main goal of it is to protect employees. I think usability is one of the things is my, dream SMS. I've developed incredible procedures from behind a desk before. Then you roll it out to personnel in the field that actually have to live it and use it, and it's just not doable, right? So I think having a safety management system and procedures that are effective and usable by the personnel they're intended by the end user, I think is my always try to be my prime objective and best attribute of a safety management system or procedure.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think a lot of that starts with the collaboration, right, between not only the technician that's doing the job, right, but what are the expectations of each person in the value chain, right? Whether it's how the customer perceives what we're trying to accomplish, or the engineer in the background that has the rainbows and sunshine of how it's supposed to get done, and then what the actual execution looks like to include things like parts delivery and availability of equipment and tools and things like that. So yeah, I think it's a collaborative effort and in all parts of the value chain to make it successful.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, 100% agree with Jeff about the usability. I like to say the proactive nature and crowdsourcing ability of the SMS, right? So the biggest lesson that I've ever learned is that the answer to what we need to do is really simple and easy as long as you find the right person with the answer. But if you don't engage those people and you don't get them together before you start doing things, you learn things the hard way.
Yes, I agree. In the other hand, we can have the best safety management system in place, fit for purpose, but if we don't work with the behaviors, of the team, there'll be a gap. That's good. Let me see here on the chat. I think the question to.
I see Jason had an interesting question.
Jason, let me just go back here and look about the difficulty. What is this is a question from Leonardo. What is the biggest difficulty of offshore wind when we talk about HSE in general? emergency, for example, what could be more different about oil and gas?
I think, yeah, as far as emergency response, I think logistics, right? I think a lot of the issue is just the remoteness of the actual work. I mean, even more so than onshore wind, and I've built wind farms in some pretty remote places onshore. But I think here in the US, one of the things, someone in HSC, I hate double handling equipment, especially heavy lifts. And one of the things we deal with now without any US flagged, installation vessels, I know we've got one under construction, is that our offshore installation vessels can't come to port because they're not US flagged and they're doing construction in US waters. So we get deliveries of components from Europe. They're offloaded. Okay. Then we have to reload them onto barges, load them, heavy crane lifts again, send them out, heavy offload them again, with the offshore installation vessel. So that's a challenge. I think that just raises your exposure, right? I think for something to happen is as much mitigation as you do.
Yeah, that's
to add to what you're saying, Jeff, I mean, the thing with marine coordination, right? So actually having a marine coordination center is different from oil and gas because you have maybe 50 vessels out in the field. How are you handling all of them? How are you communicating with all of them? How are you checking that the vessels are suitable for what you're asking them to do? There are vessels in oil and gas, but it's, I would say, at a lesser scale and in terms of numbers than what you're dealing with in offshore.
Rob, you'd like to add?
Yeah, so I'm going to admit it again, I come in this one a little bit biased, come from the oil and gas sector. And I don't know that I would phrase my response up as outlining difficulties. I do think they are extremely transferable industries when dealing with HSC for offshore wind development. But I think it's prudent to point out what I would frame up as challenges for this emerging region. And one that jumps out to me is the areas of development. Right now, the projects that have been sanctioned reside in the Northeast. There is not a strong historical oil and gas presence in the Northeast. So it's about getting a lot of the foundational support that we'll need from the workforce, emergency response support entities, the supply chain bases that will need to be in there, the working ports. This is transferring a lot of what we have luxuries of in Gulf of Mexico, even West Coast, that just do not exist today. So with that challenge, I would point to a very, and this actually feeds to one of the other questions that were asked on the board, safety culture. I think that's one of the biggest things that we face as an industry. It is a total wild card out there as we get numerous new contractors, new partners, new suppliers that are going to be joining that are a necessity to pull off offshore wind in the U.S. So that's really a big focus. And I know internally within my company, but I know also speaking with my peers on the call here, we do talk about it quite a bit in G+. The question was asked what, I think don't have it up right now, but I think it was asking to the point of what is G+ doing maybe to address this issue of contractor management. I had spoken earlier about some of the initiatives that are raised to focus on develop best practices and workshops to help deliver guidance documents. That's one that we've talked about and have put on the radar for developing, because I think everybody here involved is talking in their own workshops about this issue of safety culture out there and making sure that we're getting tools out there to engage and build up this new workforce. I know tying it back to some of the work we're doing here within Equinor is we're embedding the best G+ best practices, awareness of it into our contracts with our partners, making sure that there's a commitment there to identify, review those best practices, and then we touch on them and frequently bring them up when we have those engagement sessions with our contract partners to drive awareness, share those alerts that come out, or point them to the toolbox within the G+ website to continue to educate, learn, and build off of one another.
Thank you, Rob. I have a question to Elena. You've mentioned about the floating, and how do you see the fabrication yards in the US and Brazil?
Yeah, so I think that we haven't talked about all the challenges that we are facing in the US and, well, in the Americas in general. And I think that's one, so good point, Rachel. I think the biggest challenges we're going to find, or we are finding, is first of all, the supply chain availability. So with this appetite or big appetite of clean energy worldwide, we're expecting to have or not have the availability that we will need when talking about supply chain, and vessel is a good example. And the other challenge, the other biggest challenge that I find or I see in this market is the adaptation of infrastructures, as we mentioned. So ports, so adaptation of port to assembly the equipment before going to the wind farm. So ports, grid connection points, lines, and that's a big challenge, and that we are facing in the US. And you were asking about fabrication yards as well. So yeah, fabrication yards, it depends on where you find. I would say that in general, I see very high safety standards in most of the fabrication yards, but as I mentioned, we need a lot of suppliers to be working for us, especially in the US, because we are all working at the same time. Maybe we are entering in countries where those fabrication yards are not as safe as expected in the countries that we are working now. So we need to be very, take care of that, and very focusing on getting the same standards in those fabrication yards, no matter where the country, where the fabrication yard is in.
Good, thank you, Elena. As we are talking about challenges and opportunities, let's make a round the table about challenges and opportunities. Jeff?
I think right now, at least where we're at in our project, we've got our 4 of the 6 sections of our 2, export cables installed and pulled into onshore. I think it is going to be some mobilization challenges. I think with the sheer amount of workers we have and workers that are new to the industry, those are some challenges as far as training capacity to perform. There aren't that many locations in the United States that do GWO offshore, basic safety training. So there's been some bottlenecks there. But, with a lot of these new workers, everyone's excited about it, but I don't think they fully understand that they're not going to go home at the end of the day. They're going to be on a ship for 2 weeks straight. So I think that there'll probably be some challenges there as far as people getting accustomed to working out in that environment. It's exciting, but it's definitely one of the challenges. But it's also one of the opportunities as well, kind of growing this new workforce in the industry and getting people that are really excited about it. I know we've hired some of our first O&M technicians from Martha's Vineyard out on the island. They're going to be, GE is training them now, which is exciting. So you can actually see that it's actually starting to happen. And we've got some union labor that started working. I think it's an exciting opportunity for a lot of people to enter a new industry and workforce that's sustainable and pays well.
Good, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, sure. I agree with Jeff's for sure. I think personnel is going to be one of the big challenges we have coming, especially with as fast as we're going to be growing. One other one I would add is I think another challenge is really adapting procedures and policies that have been in place with our European partners for many years and have worked, very well for their purposes. But making sure that they meet our local regulatory requirements, that we have the appropriate documentation, signages, things that are really going to ensure that we're not only giving our employees a safe place to work, but also meeting the regulatory requirements for local content is going to be really important. And certainly something I think one of the advantages and say opportunities we have in that same nature is that because offshore has such this important planning time, different from what you see on a typical onshore construction facility. That extra time that you get up front really allows you to plan and anticipate some of these issues ahead of time and get in front of it and make the necessary changes and adjustments you need to make. So I think one of the opportunities we have is that we do have that advanced planning stage, which certainly helpful.
Good, thank you. Would love to hear Rob.
So I already tipped my head a bit to what I think is an important challenge out there when it comes to the safety culture, developing this workforce out there. But it is an opportunity as well to get in early, bring examples of what good looks like. If we do this right, we can really get off on the right foot and perpetuate the delivery of a safe new industry in the country. G Plus is one of the prime organizations that can help us do just that. But it's the wonderful thing, though, about being in the world of safety is everybody's here to work together to help deliver those safe operations. I have yet to meet a safety professional that's holding their cards close to their chest and keeping the secret sauce in their back pocket. So plenty of upside opportunity out there for all of us involved in this industry to deliver on safety.
Yanil?
Yeah, I'll just, from the Dominion Energy perspective, the challenges that we see are things like, adapting to becoming a maritime organization, right? So, we're looking at using all of these vessels. We're getting into marine coordination, vessel suitability. How do we authorize and govern work that's taking place over a very large geographical area? We're used to working within a compliance-based legal framework. OSHA has 1,000 rules, and if you follow them all, you'll be good. And we are now working towards the performance-based type of framework. 6 rules for your SMS. If you have that in place, then with a lot of we get a lot of responsibility with a lot of power, right? So you do that. And then the opportunities that I can see, there's a lot of really cool things in the US. I remember when the offshore wind market went into the UK, and there was a lot of input from the UK to saying these are things that you can improve. So where I see some really strong things in the US are like FEMA's incident command system. So integrating that into emergency response. I can see that we're also contributing to safe management of small service vessels, just from our own perspective, right? We're not going out and saying you have to do this, but I can see that the American perspective is starting to have an influence going the other way as well. And as we learn things, that will happen too. So we can definitely contribute.
Thank you. There's a question that's related also to this. Any member of the panel with reference to the oil and gas industry, does the panel think that crew transfer is a bigger risk offshore renewables, given the more distributed spread of turbines over the field?
It certainly is.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Because you have so many more transfers, and that's why we don't allow swing rope transfers. That's why we don't allow the Billy Pew. I don't know about the others, but we certainly don't. And we see some of those practices in oil and gas happening because there are such few transfers. So using the Kong Frog Quick Connector and using very, very prescriptive requirements for transfers is important in offshore wind.
Okay, just conscious of the time. I can see Scott coming back. I would like to, I learned a lot from all of you today, and I would like to say thank you for your contribution in this panel, and I hand it over to Scott.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I just had to find my my clapping emoji. Oh, that was amazing. That was really good. I was sitting there. I wish I was able to participate and answer some of the questions. But great work in coordinator, and thank you very much for your open-minded and insights into where we are. So just to conclude, then, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all the presenters. To all the panel members, to the moderators, and to G+ for coordinating this. I mean, I've been reading the comments, and they've been very positive about the whole experience. So I think it was a very well coordinated and very well worthwhile exercise. So I'd also like to take a big thank you to the audience for participating. You never know how these things are going to go, but there were some great questions, some insightful questions. And that that's the best thing for us is to ask the questions and get people's perspectives. So just to give a roundup, then I think that you've heard that we're off to a great start. You've heard about the offshore wind journey. You've heard about G+'s journey alongside that. You've heard about the emerging markets. We've had some open and honest conversations about the opportunities and the challenges, some of which are happening in real time. And I was writing during that session, and I was writing and then highlighting the ones I wanted to say. My book is just a bright yellow because there's so many. I'll just pick out a few points just to reiterate. There's a lot of learning from onshore and also from oil and gas. One which really hit home was there's no competitive advantage in health and safety. You know, it's in everyone's interest to share it. Need to engage with the contractors to make sure we've got the right competency levels. We need to bring experience from Europe, from oil and gas. The safe working standards being created in the US, uses the G+ global, the good practice guides. Work as an industry rather than siloed, which again is what I think G+ is a key instigator on. About the safety culture, about creating it and maintaining it. And I was listening to about the safety management system being I put usable and practical, rather than someone creating it behind a desk and then never actually having to live it. So, I mean, again, there was I literally highlighted everything. It was an excellent conversation. And also the challenges. We talked about personnel. We talked about adapting processes. We talked about the process. We talked to adapting to become a maritime organisation. So, some very real and thank you very much for your open and honest conversation there. So just to conclude, or in summary, I'm hugely optimistic about the US offshore wind market. I mean, not only are the pieces coming together for the industry, but it's being done in, as you can see, an open-minded way, where we're learning lessons and we're putting health and safety at the forefront of our planning and our decision making. Okay, so as a final point, have we got the final slide there? Thank you very much. So I'd just like to remind everybody that this session was like a precursor to a in-person stakeholder forum, which has been held on the 23rd of March. There's also another one next week for the APAC region. If I'll be there in Madrid on the 23rd of March, so it'd be great to see some people in the flesh. Yeah, thank you very much for your participation, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Scott, for leading us through the day, and thanks for all the speakers, panelists. An excellent event, and I hope the audience enjoyed. Also, to make the point, I received comments in why is it not happening in person. Obviously, we are all at different places, so we are really glad for all the contributions on the Americas in that online webinar. Scott, you just mentioned we also have in-person events in the US. There's one in Baltimore. There are others coming up in the year. We also try to set up something in Brazil. So please, keep you posted, and please stay in touch and engaged, and hope to meet you all soon. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.